She stumbled slightly as the gym door swung shut behind her, met with a chorus of mocking laughter. Clara Bennett, 36, stood in a faded GI, her worn brown belt tied loosely, her quiet eyes scanning the gleaming mats of Apex martial arts. "Lost your way, sweetheart," the head coach. Ethan Caldwell sneered, his black belt gleaming under fluorescent lights. Whispers slithered through the crowd. "She's here to clean the mats, right?" Clara adjusted her frayed gym bag, silent but unshaken. To them, she was nothing a shadow in their polished world. But they didn't know her secret. Clara's next move would silence the room. Have you ever been judged before you could prove yourself? Share your story below and stay with us to see how one woman turned the tables. Subscribe for more stories of triumph and let us know where you're watching from today. The polished floors of Apex Martial Arts gleamed like they belonged in a museum, not a gym. Clara Bennett stood at the edge of this world, her presence a quiet ripple in a sea of arrogance. Los Angeles sunlight poured through towering windows, bouncing off competition-grade mats and walls lined with gold-framed photos of champions. The air carried the sharp tang of fresh athletic tape and expensive cologne, mingling with the rhythmic thud of bodies hitting the ground. Men in crisp white GIs adjusted their black belts, their laughter loud and confident, while women with sculpted arms and steely gazes moved with purpose. This was no ordinary gym. It was a temple for the elite, where medals were currency and weakness was a sin. Clara 36 stood out like a smudge on a polished mirror. Her faded gi hung loosely on her slight frame, its edges frayed from years of use. Her brown belt, knotted with care, bore the scuffs of countless hours on homemade mats. No makeup touched her face, and her dark hair was pulled into a practical braid, revealing eyes that held a quiet intensity. She clutched a worn gym bag, its canvas patched where a strap had torn years ago. To the others, she was an outsider, a curiosity at best, an intruder at worst. Clara had come to Apex with a purpose, one rooted in a promise made 3 months earlier. Her mentor, Master Thomas Reed, had lain in a hospital bed, his once strong hands frail, but his voice steady. At 78, he'd spent decades teaching Jiu Jitsu in a small community dojo far from the glitz of commercial gyms. "This art is losing its soul," he'd told her, his eyes sharp with conviction. "It's become a stage for egos, not a path to growth. Clara, you're my legacy. Show them what Jiu Jitsu really means." She'd knotted her throat tight, vowing to honor the man who'd raised her after her parents' divorce left her adrift at 10. Thomas had given her more than techniques, he'd given her a way to stand tall when the world tried to make her small. Now she was here to test the rumors about Apex Martial Arts. Stories of its toxic culture had reached her through online forums and hushed conversations at local tournaments. Women were dismissed, newcomers hazed, and only those who fit the mold of champion were welcomed. Clara had devised a plan: enroll as a brown belt, hiding the black belt she'd earned at 21, and document the truth. Her friend Lily Harper, 34, was already inside, posing as a member, her phone ready to capture evidence for a presentation. Clara was building on inclusivity in martial arts. This wasn't about revenge, it was about exposing a truth that could spark change. As Clara approached the front desk, the receptionist, a young man with a buzz cut and a gym-branded polo, barely looked up from his phone. His eyes flicked over her GI, her scuffed sneakers, and the wooden bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Thomas when she'd earned her black belt. "Advanced class?" he asked, his tone heavy with doubt. "That's for brown and black belts only." Clara met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm a brown belt, trained for 16 years. He smirked, sliding a clipboard across the counter. "Sign here. Locker rooms are that way. Class starts in 10. She scribbled Clara Evans using her mother's maiden name to stay anonymous and moved toward the women's locker room. Inside, the air was cooler, scented with lavender from a diffuser in the corner. A woman with a purple belt and a tight ponytail glanced at Clara. "New here?" she asked, her tone clipped. "I'm Mia." Clara nodded, setting her bag down. "Clara, just moved to LA. Thought I'd check this place out." Mia's eyes lingered on Clara's GI, her smile thin. "Word of advice, Coach Caldwell doesn't rate women past blue belt unless you've got a national title. Says we don't have the edge. Be ready." Clara thanked her, her face calm, but her mind racing. Mia's warning was a glimpse of the culture Thomas had feared, a place where talent was measured by trophies, not heart. Stepping onto the mats, Clara felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes. The advanced class was a mix of men and women, mostly men, their GIs pristine, their belts tied with precision. Whispers followed her, sharp and cutting. Who let her in? One man muttered, adjusting his black belt. Another chuckled. Bet she's here for the yoga class. Clara bowed before stepping onto the mat, a gesture of respect that felt out of place in this room of casual arrogance. The mats were soft under her feet, a stark contrast to the splintered wooden floors of Thomas's dojo, where she'd learned to roll before she could ride a bike. At the center of the room stood Ethan Caldwell, 38. His black belt cinched tightly around a muscular frame. His dark hair was slicked back, and a scar above his eyebrow gave him a predatory edge. He was Apex's star, a coach who'd built a reputation for churning out champions through ruthless training. His social media was a gallery of sparring videos, some bordering on cruelty captioned with phrases like, "No mercy, only medals." As Clara joined the line of brown belts, Ethan's gaze locked onto her, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying across the gym. "Did someone forget to tell you this isn't a beginner's class?" The room rippled with laughter, but Clara stood still, her hands clasped behind her back. She noticed a security camera in the corner swivel slightly, its lens catching the light. Lily was in position, recording every moment. Clara's heart beat steadily, her training grounding her like an anchor. She thought of Thomas, his voice echoing in her mind. Jiu Jitsu isn't about proving you're better. It's about showing who you are. She was here to show the truth, not just about herself, but about a world that judged too quickly. As Ethan turned to address the class, his eyes lingered on her, marking her as his target. The air grew heavier, the laughter fading into a tense hum. Clara adjusted her bracelet, her fingers brushing the carved initials of her mentor. The test was only beginning. Nobody spoke her name, but every eye in the gym pinned Clara Bennett to the mat, like a specimen under glass. The air in Apex martial arts buzzed with anticipation, the kind that precedes a storm. Clara stood among the brown belts, her faded GI, a silent defiance against the pristine uniforms around her. The mats beneath her feet were cool, their surface slick with the residue of countless sparring sessions. Ethan Caldwell, the head coach, paced like a predator, his scar catching the light as he scanned the line of students. His gaze settled on Clara, and the room seemed to tilt toward her, every whisper and smirk aimed at her presence. She was 36, a stranger in this temple of champions, and they were determined to make her feel it. Ethan clapped his hands, the sound sharp enough to silence the murmurs. "Let's start with a warm-up drill," he announced, his voice carrying a theatrical edge. "But first, let's welcome our new brown belt properly." He turned to Clara, his smile a blade wrapped in charm. "What's your name again?" "Clara, was it? Tell us, where'd you earn that belt?" "Some community center in the sticks." The question landed like a jab, and laughter rippled through the class. A man with a shaved head snorted, muttering, "Probably bought it online." Clara's expression remained steady, her hands clasped behind her back. "I trained at Reed's Academy," she said, her voice clear but unassuming, naming the small dojo her mentor Thomas Reed had run for decades. Ethan's eyebrows shot up, mock surprise painting his face. "Reed's never heard of it. Must be one of those inner peace schools, right?" More chuckles followed, each one a pinprick against her skin. The drill began, a simple guard passing exercise, but Ethan's attention stayed locked on Clara. He paired her with Ryan, a hulking brown belt, whose smirk matched the coach's. Ryan outweighed her by at least 60 pounds, his GI stretched tight over muscles, honed by years of competition. "Don't break her," Ryan Ethan called, loud enough for the whole gym to hear. "She's delicate." The words stung, not because they were true, but because they echoed a memory Clara had buried long ago. At 12, she'd overheard her middle school gym teacher tell a classmate girls like, "Clara shouldn't try sports, they're just not built for it." Thomas had found her crying in the dojo that day, his gentle voice pulling her back. "Strength isn't in your muscles," he'd said. "It's in your choice to keep going." Now, as Ryan bore down on her, his grip unnecessarily rough, Clara chose to keep going. The drill escalated, Ethan's instructions growing sharper. More pressure. Ryan, he barked, circling them. "She needs to feel a real guard." Ryan complied, his knee digging into Clara's thigh, his weight pressing harder than the technique required. Clara adjusted her position, using leverage to ease the strain, but she kept her movements measured, hiding the black belt skills she'd honed since her teens. A woman nearby, Mia from the locker room, whispered to another student, "She's gonna tap out in 10 seconds. The comment was meant to be quiet, but it carried slicing through the hum of the gym. Clara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, her focus on the mat, on the rhythm of her breath. Ethan knelt beside them, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your posture's all wrong, Clara. Here, let me fix it." He grabbed her arm, repositioning it in a way that weakened her defense, a deliberate sabotage she recognized instantly. In Thomas's dojo, such a move would have been unthinkable. A teacher's role was to elevate, not undermine. "Thank you, sir." She said, her tone polite, but her eyes sharp. Ethan stood addressing the class. "This is what happens when you train in backyards instead of real gyms. No fundamentals." The insult wasn't just for her. It was a dagger aimed at Thomas's legacy, at the man who'd taught her that Jiu Jitsu was about building people up, not tearing them down. The session shifted to a new exercise, a flow drill meant to test agility. Ethan called Clara to demonstrate with him, a spotlight she hadn't sought. As they faced each other, he leaned in, his voice low but audible to those nearby. "Don't embarrass yourself, sweetheart. Just follow my lead." Before she could respond, he swept her legs, dropping her to the mat with more force than necessary. The impact echoed and a few students gasped, though most laughed. "Oops," Ethan said, offering a hand to help her up, only to pull it back as she reached for it. "Guess you're not ready for this level." The room erupted in snickers, and Clara felt the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment. A memory flashed, her first day at Thomas's dojo. A shy girl surrounded by boys who laughed, until she pinned one in a spar. Thomas had smiled, then his pride a quiet fire. She drew on that, now rising slowly, her face calm, but her hands trembling slightly. The final blow came as Ethan dismissed the drill. He turned to the class, his voice booming. "Look, I'll be honest. People like Clara don't belong in advanced classes. She's got no record, no medals, no grit. What is she even doing here?" The words landed like a sledgehammer, stripping her of name, skill, and purpose. The gym fell silent, the kind of silence that smothers. Clara stood alone, her GI slightly askew her brown belt, a target for their scorn. Ryan muttered, "Should have stayed home." Mia added, "Maybe try Zumba." The collective disdain was a living thing wrapping around her, squeezing tight. Yet Clara didn't flinch. She adjusted her belt, her fingers brushing the wooden bracelet Thomas had given her. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was a promise. She hiked a breath, her eyes lifting to meet Ethan's, and in that moment, the air shifted heavy with something unspoken. The gym's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the mats seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what came next. The laughter had faded, but the silence that followed crushed Clara Bennett heavier than any blow. The mats of Apex martial arts stretched out around her, vast and empty, as if the gym had swallowed her whole. The other students drifted back to their drills, their voices a low hum that no longer included her. Ethan Caldwell's taunts lingered in the air, sharp as the scent of sweat and rubber that clung to the room. Clara stood alone, her faded GI slightly rumpled her brown belt, a quiet defiance against the polished world that had just rejected her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her face, and for a moment she was invisible, a ghost in a place that worshipped champions. She moved to the edge of the mat, her steps slow, deliberate, as if testing whether the ground would hold her weight. The eyes that had pierced her moments ago now slid past, indifferent, as if she'd never existed. Clara's hands hung at her sides, fingers brushing the wooden bracelet on her wrist, the one Thomas Reed had carved for her when she earned her black belt at 21. Its surface was smooth from years of touch, a tether to the man who'd seen her worth when no one else had. But now, standing in this gleaming temple of ego, she felt that worth slipping away like sand through her fingers. Had she been wrong to come here? Had she misread Thomas's dying wish? The questions coiled in her chest, heavy and cold, pulling her inward. Clara's mind drifted to a memory, sharp and unbidden. She was 10, sitting on the splintered floor of Thomas's dojo, her knees bruised from her first sparring session. Her parents' divorce had left her quiet, withdrawn, a girl who flinched at loud voices. That day a boy had laughed when she fumbled a sweep, his words cutting deeper than the fall. "You're too weak for this," he'd said, and she'd believed him. Thomas had knelt beside her, his calloused hand gentle on her shoulder. "Weakness isn't in your body, Clara," he'd said, his voice low and steady. "It's in giving up. You choose to stay. You're already stronger than they know." She'd carried those words through every challenge, every moment when the world tried to make her small. But here in Apex's unforgiving light, They felt distant, like a song she could no longer hear. What if Ethan was right? The thought crept in uninvited as she leaned against a padded wall, the cool vinyl pressing into her back. What if she didn't belong here in this world of medals and bravado? What if Thomas's dream of a Jiu Jitsu that lifted everyone was just an old man's fantasy? Clara's gaze fell to her GI, its frayed edges a map of her journey. She remembered the nights she'd trained until her muscles screamed, Thomas watching with quiet pride. He'd never cared about trophies, only about the fire in her heart. But that fire felt dim now, smothered by the weight of a room that saw her as nothing. Her breath hitched a small sound lost in the gym's steady rhythm. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired, the kind of tired that settles into your bones and whispers surrender. Yet something stirred, faint but stubborn, like a pulse beneath the surface. Clara's fingers tightened around her bracelet, tracing the initials TR etched into the wood. She thought of Lily, her friend somewhere in the gym, recording every moment of this test. She thought of the women, like Mia, hardened by a culture that demanded they prove themselves twice over. And she thought of Thomas, his final words to her. Show them who you are. Clara exhaled, her breath steadying, and unclasped the bracelet, slipping it into her GI's pocket. It wasn't surrender, it was a choice, a quiet promise to herself. She straightened her eyes, lifting to the mats where Ethan barked orders, unaware of the shift within her. The gym's hum grew louder, but Clara's heart beat stronger, a rhythm that carried her toward the next moment where everything would change. Clara Bennett hadn't left the mat, and the gym didn't notice until her footsteps echoed like a heartbeat in the silence. The air in Apex martial arts crackled with routine, the hum of drills and the thud of bodies on mats filling the space. Clara stood at the edge of the group, her faded GI blending into the shadows of the polished gym. The fluorescent lights cast a stark glow, highlighting the sweat on the students' faces and the gleam of Ethan Caldwell's black belt as he barked instructions. Moments ago, Clara had been invisible, her worth dismissed by laughter and cruel words. Now, as Ethan clapped his hands to signal a new exercise, something shifted. His eyes flicked to her, narrowing as if sensing an unspoken challenge. "Let's make this fun," he announced, his voice carrying a predatory edge. "Sparring gauntlet, 30-second rounds, winner stays on." The students murmured, excitement rippling through the room. Ethan's gaze locked onto Clara. "You new girl. Let's see if you can last 10 seconds. The gym fell quiet, the weight of his words sinking in. Sparring with the head coach on her first day was unheard of, a gauntlet designed to break her. Clara stepped forward, her movements steady, her brown belt tied with quiet precision. She bowed, a gesture of respect that felt like a relic in this place of bravado. Ethan didn't return the bow, his scar twitching as he smirked. "Start standing," he said, circling her like a shark. The students formed a loose circle around the mat, their whispers a low hum. Ryan, the hulking brown belt, muttered, "This'll be quick." Mia, the purple belt from the locker room, folded her arms, her expression unreadable. Lily, stationed near the water cooler, adjusted her phone, ensuring the camera caught every angle. Clara's heart beat evenly, her training grounding her like a deep root. She thought of Thomas Reed, her mentor, his voice a steady whisper. Jiu-Jitsu reveals who you are when the world bets against you. Ethan lunged first, a swift double-leg takedown meant to overpower her. Clara sidestepped, her movement fluid, almost effortless, guiding his momentum to the mat with a gentle redirection. The gym inhaled sharply, a collective gasp breaking the silence. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his smirk faltering. "Lucky," he muttered louder now. "Try that again." He shot in for another takedown this time, with more force, but Clara was ready. She pivoted, using his weight against him, and in a blink, she was behind him, her arms locking into a rear naked choke. The move was precise, textbook perfect, her legs wrapping around his torso like a vice. Ethan's eyes widened, shock replacing arrogance as he struggled against her hold. The students froze, their murmurs dying. 7 seconds ticked by. 8, 9. Ethan's face reddened, his breath shallow, his hands clawing at her arms. Clara leaned close, her voice calm, barely audible. "Tap. Coach. It's okay." At 10 seconds, his hand slapped the mat, the sound a thunderclap in the stunned gym. Clara released the hold instantly, rolling back to a kneeling position, her breath even. She bowed again, her face composed, while Ethan pushed himself up, his GI disheveled, his scar stark against flush skin. The room was a vacuum, the air sucked out by what they'd just witnessed. Ryan's jaw hung slack, his earlier smugness gone. Mia's arms dropped, her eyes wide with something like awe. Ethan adjusted his belt, his voice tight. "Fluke," he said, but the word lacked conviction. Clara rose, her gaze steady, and that's when the truth began to unravel. A woman in the back, an older black belt named Ellen, squinted at Clara. Recognition dawning. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "That choke, it's Reed's signature. You trained with Thomas Reed." The name landed like a spark in dry grass, igniting whispers. Thomas Reed, a legend in Jiu Jitsu's quieter corners, was known for his technical brilliance and refusal to chase fame. Clara nodded, once her silence louder than any boast. "I'm his student," she said simply. "His last one." Ethan's face shifted, confusion giving way to realization. "You're not a brown belt," he said almost to himself. Clara met his gaze, her voice soft but unyielding. "I earned my black belt 15 years ago. I wore brown today to see how this gym treats newcomers." The words hung in the air, a quiet indictment. The students exchanged glances, some shifting uncomfortably, others staring at Ethan, whose authority seemed to shrink with every passing second. Ryan muttered an awkward, "No way," while Mia shook her head, a small smile breaking through. Lily, still filming, caught Clara's eye, her nod subtle but proud. The gym's energy flipped the crowd's earlier disdain, replaced by a mix of shock and reluctant respect. Ethan tried to regain control, his voice strained. "Class back to drills." But his words fell flat, drowned by the weight of Clara's revelation. Clara stepped off the mat, her gym bag slung over her shoulder. She paused, turning to Ethan, her tone measured but piercing. "Jiu-Jitsu isn't about breaking people, coach. It's about showing them they're enough." She walked toward the locker room, her footsteps steady, leaving a room full of stunned faces in her wake. Ethan stood rooted, his hands flexing his pride, a visible wound. The students hesitated, some returning to their drills, others watching Clara's retreating figure. Mia approached, her voice low. "That was unreal. You're not what I expected." Clara offered a small smile, adjusting her bracelet, the one Thomas had carved. The gym's fluorescent lights flickered, and the mats seemed to hum with a new energy, as if the space itself knew something bigger was coming. Ethan Caldwell stood alone on the mat, but no one met his gaze, not anymore. The air in Apex Martial Arts hung heavy, thick, with the aftershock of Clara Bennett's revelation. The gym's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the competition grade mats, where students shuffled, their earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. Moments ago, Clara had dismantled Ethan's authority with a 10-second choke, her black belt truth, exposing the gym's toxic heart. Now, as she stood near the water cooler, her faded GI and quiet presence commanded the room without a word. Ethan adjusted his black belt, his scar stark against flush skin, his eyes darting as if searching for an anchor. The students, once his loyal chorus, turned away, their whispers a low tide pulling back from his shore. Ethan clapped his hands, the sound hollow. "Back to drills," he ordered, but his voice lacked its usual bite. A few students moved sluggishly, their focus fractured. Ryan, the hulking brown belt who'd mocked Clara earlier, fumbled with his GI, avoiding her direction. Mia, the purple belt, lingered near the edge of the mat. Her arms uncrossed, her expression softened by a newfound respect. Ellen, the older black belt who'd recognized Clara's technique, stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Coach, maybe we should talk about what just happened." Ethan's jaw tightened, his smile forced. "Nothing to talk about, Ellen. A lucky move, that's all." But the words fell flat, and Ellen's raised eyebrow spoke louder than any rebuttal. The gym's culture, built on Ethan's mantra of champions only, was cracking under the weight of Clara's quiet strength. The shift rippled outward. A young black belt, Jason, who'd been featured in Apex's promotional videos, approached Ethan, his tone hesitant. "Coach, I've got a friend who trained with Thomas Reed. He says Reed's techniques are legendary. Why didn't we know she was his student?" The question wasn't accusatory, but it stung, and Ethan's response a curt, "Doesn't matter, only deepened the unease." Students exchanged glances, some whispering about Reed's legacy, others about Clara's sparring. A woman in her 20s, a blue belt who'd stayed silent during the earlier taunts, approached Clara, her voice low. "I'm sorry for laughing earlier. I didn't know. I mean, you're incredible." Clara nodded, her smile gentle, but guarded her fingers, brushing the wooden bracelet in her pocket, a reminder of Thomas's teachings. "Lift others even when they've pushed you down." The crowd's hypocrisy surfaced like oil on water. Ryan, who'd called Clara delicate, now tried to make amends, his voice overly friendly. "Hey Clara, that choke was solid. You should teach us sometime." His grin was brittle, and Clara's silence paired with a steady gaze made him shuffle back to his partner. Mia, more genuine, admitted, "I thought you were out of your depth. I was wrong." Clara offered a small nod, her eyes warm but resolute. She wasn't here to collect apologies or bask in their sudden admiration. She was here for something bigger, a promise to Thomas Reed to restore Jiu Jitsu's soul. The gym's security camera, still rolling under Lily's discreet guidance, captured every moment: the awkward apologies, the shifting allegiances, the slow unraveling of Ethan's reign. Ethan felt the tide turning. He called for a water break, his voice tighter now, and approached Clara, his posture stiff. "You came here to make a point, didn't you?" he said, low enough that only she could hear. "What's your end game?" "Humiliate me." Clara met his gaze, her voice even. "I came to see if this gym values growth over ego. You showed me the answer." Her words were a mirror reflecting Ethan's methods, his hazing, his dismissal of women, his worship of medals over character. He flinched, his scar twitching, and for a moment, vulnerability flickered in his eyes. "This is my gym," he said, but the statement sounded more like a plea. Clara didn't respond, only adjusted her gym bag and stepped toward the locker room, her presence a quiet rebuke. As she passed the mat, a subtle change took root. A new poster had appeared on the gym's announcement board, pinned there by Ellen during the break. It read, "Jiu Jitsu principles, respect, humility, excellence." The words, drawn from Thomas Reed's philosophy, stood in stark contrast to Apex's usual slogans of "No mercy" and "Champions only." Students glanced at it, some nodding, others pausing as if seeing the gym anew. Clara's victory wasn't in the choke she'd applied, but in the seed she'd planted, a vision of jiu-jitsu that welcomed all, not just the loudest or strongest. She paused at the gym's glass doors, the Los Angeles sunlight spilling through, warming her face. She didn't look back at Ethan, who stood frozen, his hands clenched, or at the students now grappling with their own reflections. Her work here wasn't done, but the first step had been taken, and the path ahead shimmered with possibility. Clara Bennett stepped into the Los Angeles dusk, and for the first time in years, the weight of being unseen lifted from her shoulders. The gym's glass doors whispered shut behind her, muffling the hum of Apex martial arts. Clara stood on the sidewalk, the evening air cool against her skin, carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus from a nearby tree. Her faded GI hung loosely, its frayed edges catching the golden light of the setting sun. She was 36, a woman who'd walked into a world that tried to erase her, only to leave it changed. The memory of Ethan's stunned face, the students' shifting gazes, and the new poster bearing Thomas Reed's principles lingered, but they didn't define her. She'd come to honor a promise, not to settle scores. Looking back, Clara saw the girl she'd been, 10 years old, bruised and quiet, hiding in Thomas's dojo, after her world fractured. She'd thought strength meant winning, proving others wrong. Thomas had taught her otherwise. "It's not about being louder than their laughter," he'd said, his voice a steady anchor. "It's about knowing you're enough." She'd carried those words through every taunt, every dismissal, every moment she'd been told she didn't belong. Today she hadn't just sparred with Ethan, she'd sparred with that old doubt, and won. Clara's fingers traced the wooden bracelet in her pocket, its carved initials warm from her touch. She didn't need Apex's approval, or their apologies. She needed only to stay true to the fire Thomas had kindled, the one that burned brightest when she stood for something bigger than herself. She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, its weight a quiet vow. The streetlights flickered on, casting soft halos on the pavement, and Clara smiled, a small, unshakable curve of her lips. She was enough. Always had been. The real work, changing hearts, rebuilding Jiu-Jitsu's soul, lay ahead, but for now, this moment was hers. Have you ever felt judged but found strength to rise above? Share your story in the comments, we'd love to hear it. Subscribe for more tales of triumph, and tell us where you're watching from today. Let's keep lifting each other up, just like Clara did.